All right, folks, you ready? Folks got their coffee and sugar, so I hope so. We have a few more sessions to go. Good afternoon. I'm Jane Greenberg. I'm director of the Metadata Research Center at Drexel University, and I'm affiliated with ID4. The Imageomics groups lets me hang out with them still, thankfully, because I was part of the BGNN seed grant, and that's just to say, you know, metadata is everywhere. Okay. The session here is entitled, focusing on data and cyber infrastructure. It's a panel. We have 3 experts. I would like to credit Anand. Where are you? Okay. And Zhangwu, because the 3 of us actually were a team. We did a divide and conquer, and they're going to oversee some panels. So we have 3 panelists who are experts in data and cyber infrastructure. And we've asked them to think about 3 questions briefly in terms of their HDR or other project which they are engaged in, right? What are best practices in their community in terms of data and cyber infrastructure? So best practices. The second question concerns, in terms of their best practices and what they know, what is useful to other HDRs or the larger cyber infrastructure? And the third question is, where are their pain points? Where do they have needs? Where might other HDRs or tripods or other cyber infrastructure activities taking place have solutions? And so they're going to let you know their needs. And what we're going to do is each of the presenters, we ask them to speak for no more than 10 minutes. We have a timer up here, so we're going to try to stick to that. We'll see if there's a burning, question or 2 after each presenter. And then at the end, we'll open it up for a general discussion. So I've also asked each of the presenters to introduce themselves so they can share what they would like to about themselves. So we're going to start with Geoffrey Fox, and you're ready to take it away.
Do I stay here?
You can sit, you can stand, but let's make sure you're audible, okay?
Can you hear me?
Can folks hear him? Okay. Is your...
Somebody said they could hear me. That's on.
Okay, you're on.
Yep.
You should probably not put that all the way in your pocket.
All right.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Geoffrey.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Geoffrey Fox. I'm at the University of Virginia. I used to be at Indiana University, and my expertise is high performance computing and theoretical physics. My Ph.D. is in particle physics. And the new text to image systems are pretty good at making decorations for slides. This is my effort to try to get big data computing represented by the computer. All right. All right, so I'm not funded by HDR, so I can talk about anything. I will talk about ML Commons, which resonates with many things you've heard about today. ML Commons is by far the best way I have ever found of interacting with industry. It was originally set up by actually some academics and the major industry companies. There are now 62 companies in ML Commons, and it has a mission of accelerating machine learning innovation to benefit everyone. It is set up originally around this project called MLPerf. And MLPerf is developing non-proprietary benchmarks for machine learning. Here are some statistics on the right. So there are 11 universities, 6 DOE labs, and also several of the NSF centers are represented. And sort of interesting to see how you may wish to learn how to run a community from ML Commons, or you can either join that community or set up a different community with similar principles. So it has about, it's divided up into working groups, which are sort of your breakout sections. And those working groups, we usually once or twice a week, once a week or once every 2 weeks. So we get around 15 working groups per week. And there's a quarterly grand meeting of everybody. There are 2,000 members of ML Commons. The total effort is pretty large. Industry puts about 50 FTEs into ML Commons work. That's because every time there's a new benchmark or enhanced benchmark, NVIDIA, Intel, Google, and so on compete to try to get better answers on that. I will mainly focus on ML Commons research, which is what I've worked on most of the time for obvious reasons, as I'm a researcher. And it has 125 members. And my particular focus is the science working group, which has 27 members over the 27 attendees over the last year. If you look at what it does all the major aspects of machine learning. It has the inference and training benchmarks. It has a data sets study, which looks at things like why ImageNet is not the best data set for images. Best practices. It studies power use, it studies the actual software to run, and it also sets up the ontologies needed to record the results. All right. And there are going to be some more. We have here the major working group, Commons Research Algorithms, Data Perf, that's understanding how to set up data sets in a suitable fashion. Dynabench, which is running the data set, running the benchmarks. Medical has a focus on federated learning for medicine. Science is focused on science benchmarks, and storage is focused on storage. And we have new working groups on robustness, autonomous vehicles, and metaverse. This thing is not easy to get to work.
Point this way.
Okay, fine. That's it. Oh, I point here. Ah, that's my problem. Okay, fine. That's obvious. I apologize. That's pretty stupid. Okay. So in this area, it seems to be very important to collaborate with industry. Not only do they actually probably have more resources than the research community, they're actually making a lot of the breakthroughs, both in algorithms and the software. And although there's differences in their applications, important technologies like transformer networks came out first from natural language processing, but they're generally applicable to time series and other types of problems in science. Also, it's important to try to understand the similarities and differences between supercomputers and clouds. If you listen to industry, they always run on clouds. But if you look at the clouds they run on, they're actually bigger than the supercomputers that are, at least the particular runs. The cloud runs on 4,000 Google TPUs or similar number of A100s. Those are actually larger than any, for a single job, larger than anything run on a supercomputer. Although it is called ML Commons and ML Perf, actually, as actually the pre-discussion so far, it's actually dominated by deep learning. Seems to be. Yeah, all right, so that's. It seems to be, I'm apologizing. Okay, so here is just a list of what the science working group is doing, and also there is an HPC working group, which also effectively does science, but more focusing on using supercomputers. And here we have 7 different applications, and the interesting feature of the science working group is that the benchmark is not a performance benchmark, how fast the hardware runs, but the scientific discovery benchmark, how good the prediction is. And so you're challenged to improve the prediction. And you can see there is drug discovery, electron microscopy, earthquake predicting earthquakes and analyzing satellite data. So we meant to discuss some future activities, and one of the possibilities is we have this community, which I suggest you might be able to learn from or even join. We would be good, as it covers a lot of technologies, a lot of application areas, to try to develop what some people call foundation models, which are particular models that cover a wide range of applications. And if you look at the science ones we have so far, they can be divided into what I would call a pattern, and a given pattern might be a particular foundation model. And this slide here just lists such patterns. They come from one which is reinforcement learning based, which has been used to control networks and computers and experiments. We've had lots of discussion of image-based networks. And actually of those 7 so far I put on the previous slide, 4 of them were image-based. There are actually many graph-based science applications. The drug discovery is a dense network, so it has a different structure. And time series and diffusion and GAN models also have different foci, as to what I would call surrogate models that represent simulations. So one interesting thing of bringing a big community together is that we can try to look with similar models across different application areas. I think that's the end.
Great. Thank you so much. Let's hand this on to Carol.
I don't know, even when I point in that direction, it doesn't work.
So we can take a few moments to see if there's a question for Geoffrey on this topic. What he produced? Yes. Phil, you have. Okay, good.
Yeah, so we're looking at building these ML data challenges, so that we're going to have a discussion about this breakout session this evening. And a lot of it, we're really hoping, and I know you've been in contact with some of my colleagues like Nyan, who've been doing ML Perf Tiny. But we're wondering if there's a nice way to connect this with the ML Commons science, right, at a higher level, to kind of motivate our challenges, but then have these models eventually become benchmarks for future ML Commons.
Well, I mean, I'm the co-chair of ML Commons Science, and the Janapa Reddy from Harvard is the lead of the ML Commons research, which is the overall research arm, which covers everything, including data sets and software. So I'm happy to put you in contact with the highest levels, including the leaders of ML Commons itself, which is Peter Mattson and David Cantor.
But yeah, I mean, maybe my question is there a platform already than just talking to people? Is there like a way to kind of onboard new models, onboard new challenges?
You should come to one of our, either an ML Commons research, if you're very general, or an ML Commons science working group meeting, and we'll be happy to let you present what you'd like to do and then work with you to implement it.
Yeah, okay. I mean, we're already doing this, right? So it's not, but yeah, I was just wondering if there's some generic.
We'd love you to, it's a very, as I said, it aims to democratize machine learning. It is trying to take steps which help the whole community. That's why it's sort of interesting. Although it's dominated by industry, this is all non-proprietary industry work.
Yeah.
So it's very outward focused. It is not inward focused at all.
Thank you. We have another question in the back. Go ahead.
Sorry. Thank you. This is very provocative, and it's nice to know that it exists. I have a question for you. So you serve on the science group, or co-chair of the science group. What do you think is the advantage of having domain specialists involved in data science as opposed to data science in the law?
Well, I can even give you the example of that. One of those benchmarks is earthquakes. That was the one I developed. Although I'm a physicist, I'm not actually an expert on earth science, but my colleague, he realized that a certain particular measure was very sensitive to the strain in the faults, and therefore was a particularly good indicator of earthquakes. And I found by taking the deep learning network and changing the input from the raw magnitudes to these process magnitudes representing strain, I got significantly better answers. So I think it's essential. I think it's absolutely essential to have domain specialists, because otherwise we don't know how good the answer is, and also we don't have these insights as to what aspects of the data are most important.
All right, thanks for the questions, and we will have a more general discussion after. So in the interest of time, we're going to move on to Carol Song. Carol, maybe introduce yourself first, and then you have the little clicker. You point out that way.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was wondering
Don't know what the laser is,
I'm
but
not gonna mess with it. I'll just say next. So I
okay.
can focus
So,
on what I say. Yeah, so
Shishay, you're going to do the slide forward then?
would
Who's
you,
going to stay next?
Okay.
Okay.
okay, thank
We
you.
have a coordinated effort here.
Thank you, thank you. Team effort.
Collaborative. Yeah.
So my name is Carol Song. I'm with Purdue's Rosen Center for Advanced Computing. And my contact information is on the first slide if you would like to talk afterwards. So I'm part of the
Carol,
iGuide.
sorry, could you hold mic a little bit
Oh,
closer to your mouth?
closer? Yeah.
Oh, that's perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm part of the iGuide Institute, the HDR Institute, PI Shaolin Wang. I'm also the co-lead within the institute. So I just showed this really quickly. So to orient, there are 6 kind of thematic teams, and there is one that's called Core CI, Core Cyber Infrastructure, Capabilities and Services. And I'm co-lead with Anand to make it happen. So next slide, please. And so this is a picture to kind of orient, where the cyber infrastructure, I'll just say CI, sits in the institute. So we're looking at ourselves as this bridging piece from distributed and diverse data assets from all kinds of domains and repositories, and bridging these resources to enable convergent science around geospatial data, around resilience and sustainability research. Next, please. So we were given 3 questions to address. The first one is the sort of the best practices that we've been using. We're relatively new. We're a year into the Institute's lifetime. And I thought about, a lot of the things that we are doing, and I want to highlight 3 things. The first one is we're really big on integrate rather than building everything from scratch and building our own. So we start off with looking at everything that the team represents and things that are available and relevant and integrate those. And the idea is that we want to bring together disparate tools and data sets and make the use of HPC, high performance computing, and cloud resources transparent, because we're working with a very diverse cross-disciplinary team. And we also want to make data actionable. So it's not just data repositories with data for downloading. You can actually act on those data sets, for example, using tools and so on. And we heard a lot discussions about reproducibility, and we're making our cyber infrastructure to enable reproducible workflows. The second aspect is we want to make data and CI useful and usable. So we don't want to just, be in a group of computer scientists and just create things. We can create lots of those, but we want to create those that are impactful. And data wrangling, I heard people using this word. So I'm really glad to hear that, because I use that a lot, because I just can enumerate all the difficulties that we have with data sets. So wrangling seemed to be a good word. And our approach is, we want to be driven by real science cases. So we select pilots, but we're designing with general applications in mind. And we also want to make sure that we lower the barrier of entry, adopting familiar interfaces and hiding a lot of the steps, integration behind it. And the third one is, I'm sure all of us sort of struggles and have to balance, the audiences we're talking to, we're serving, we're supporting. And so for us, this list doesn't mean tiers, but, we specifically talk to different groups of people, the convergence researchers, the education and training coordination groups, and broader engagement, and also knowledge transfer. So even though we're in the first year, we have our eyes towards, the final outcome. How do we get these transferred to the broader community? And one of the ways we're doing it is through a virtual consulting service to start engaging upfront. Next slide, please. This is a busy slide. The only thing I want to highlight here is that this on the upper left corner is an example of our platform that you can see the entry point for a lot of people would be the Jupyter Hub and our resource catalog. And then where the middleware layer is entirely integrated, integration of existing platforms and software systems. And then we're building on top of several large investments from NSF and other funding agencies and industry. So the HPC system, ENVO, funded by NSF, Globus, and HPC storage and Singularity containers. Obviously, these big blocks include a lot of other technologies I wouldn't enumerate. And then, here's an example showing that the difficulties researchers typically have working across domains and working with a lot of distributed data sets. And some steps they can handle pretty well with the green smiling faces. Others are, getting more and more difficult. And then they have biggest issue with scaling up when they need to use larger scale resources. And so through a integrated platform, we're able to allow these domain researchers to work on their data, work to connect with data, and do their analysis, do their visualization all through the notebook. Next one, please. So the next question is the impact on the HDR and larger infrastructure. I listed a couple of things. The ones I like to highlight is, there are your, often heard things like data wrangling tools. We have emphasis on seamless and scalable systems, and those are, we have the aim of making those available to the broader community. And the resource catalog, we want to make data actionable, and also beyond data, the catalog, that's why we call it resource catalog. It has tools, it has workflows, and so on. And one thing I do want to highlight is work in progress, data hypercube. That's one of the major pieces from the Institute that would address hyperdimensional data, which we deal a lot with in the geospatial data arena. And that is something we want to bring it outside the computer science lab and make it usable by a lot more people. And the human factor, I can't say enough about human factors. We have a large team of we call CI professionals and RSE. That's a term that we're using more and more, research software engineers. I can see that resonate probably with a lot of the projects here. And these are people who would really help to make your research product more usable. And we call it production quality, 24/7 availability and so on. And the last but not the least is that we do want to connect with the projects here and possibly beyond to harvest data. And we believe we have lots of tools that we can work with partners to make their data available to other applications and tools as well. Next one, is there a next one? Okay, needs. So this one, I won't go into the details, but just show, the type of challenges we're dealing with. Next slide, my last one. So the needs, I think all of our researchers have issues dealing with large scale data. And we have data studies that needs data on a just rough scan, it's 150 terabytes. And even though storage in theory is not an issue, but just to be able to wrangle that much data and make that available to the domain science researchers, that is a major challenge. And hyperdimensional data I talked about. And we're also having to work on integrating the latest advances in geospatial AI and data science into cyber infrastructure to make it more operational. And of course, we are all dealing with the gaps between expertise in using cyber infrastructure. So I think that's it.
Thank you, Carol. So let's open it up for a moment or two, see if there's a question specific for Carol. Let's see. Folks. Yeah, Tanya, thank you.
Wow. So how do we get, let's say, how transferable is it to other domains or that are very, very nearby domains, like biological domains, let's say, that this wealth of data infrastructure, what can we learn from you and what can we take directly from this list?
That would involve some complicated answers, but I'll give it a try. And so, as I said, one of the things we're doing from the get-go is to integrate things rather than building new stuff, right? So we do build on a number of very modular software stacks that's been funded by NSF, and they're at the operational stage. And so the concept can be easily applied to other types of data, building data pipelines and building workflows, involving computation also as well as like machine learning models, things like that. So I think all of those could be applied, and to operationalize those, that's what we're working towards, to make those platforms easier to deploy. For example, we're deploying it in Kubernetes-based systems and so on. So a lot of places you can just take it and go.
Thank you. Other questions? So I think you're acting local and thinking globally. Your project. Would somebody else have their hand up? Oh, we have one other question. Great.
It's not really a question, but I think just a quick comment on this very nice question posed. That is, I heard a lot of data examples mentioned here have geospatial and location references. Obviously, that's a pretty nice leverage, because we deal with a lot of data with location references. And in your project, for instance, you have imagery, such as from biogeography studies and so on, has location references. So that in itself has, I think, great opportunities to learn from each other, how to handle metadata, how to handle location-based integration among data sets, and how to make such data sets more broadly accessible at a scale.
All right, great comment. That might be a topic for one of these working groups that's supposed to come out of this meeting. So Thanks for raising that. All right, so we're going to move on to our next presenter.
I will try. I'm going to try. I'm going to be brave or stupid. I just got off being 9 years a department head, so you figure out my intelligence. So it no longer says professor and department head, it just says professor, which is just the happiest demotion and title I've ever had. So anyway, I'm a professor in the Department of Computer Science at RPI in Troy, New York. And in this context, I'm the co-associate research directors. I'm more of the machine learning and computer vision side, and Hank Bart is on the more biological side. All right, whoops, did I go two? Yeah. Oh, the heck with it. Can we go back one, please? Can we go? Yep. There we go. All right, so we'll start with some best practices, and I've gotten this broken down into categories. So we'll start with code, and this sounds like, to a computer scientist, this sounds just second nature, but it's not to a biologist. And half of our team is biologists. Okay, so we are working, obviously we're, for code documents and Docker images, we're using GitHub. This is a cultural shift, and our goal is full adoption. And one of the ways we're doing this is with a course, an Imageomics course. It's a year-long 2-credit course that in the middle of these, they're half biologists, half computer science students, and they're learning each other's disciplines. They're learning to work together. We're taking them for the month of January to Kenya, and then they have to complete a research project by the end of the spring semester. And again, using GitHub is just should become second nature to them. Next slide, please. So this is the most complex slide, data. So we have very complicated data. It's biological data. Biology, I've learned, is quite messy. So we have raw images and the associated metadata that comes with the image collection or with the image annotations. So we have an extensive initial organization. And by the way, let me just stop and mention, I'm representing the work of about 11 PIs. And so if I get something wrong, it's my fault, but give them credit for everything. Okay, so a lot of careful storage we're using, and I didn't even know this before I got involved, ARC IDs, so that we can identify and find resources. Lots of sources of biological knowledges, ontologies, phylogenies, knowledge graphs, taxonomic keys. And so you can see some of that illustrated in the upper right, where there's a museum fish specimen with information in the upper right about the source and the species and a ruler that you have to segment. And so we have to be able to do that consistently across thousands and thousands of fish. And even extract the dorsal fin, even though it's transparent. And I don't even remember the appropriate phrase for that. Sorry, biologists. And we get intermediate results. We get curated image sets, results of pre-processing and derived metadata that goes back in and becomes metadata for the next processing unit. And a lot of the work, at least in part of the team, stems from the earlier BGNN project. And Jane led the metadata effort, at least in extracting of it. So she's still part of our team as we go forward. The next one at the end is ML models. Obviously, that's what we're producing in many cases. And these ML models, as part of our research and part of our institute, are turned around and actually used. So the final ML results are things like trait prediction, species classifications, distance metrics, and they become the input to the biological analysis. They help form the hypotheses that then get confirmed. So we've got this, the whole design in the institute is this sort of cycle of knowledge back and forth between biology and machine learning. Next slide, please. So we're working on reproducibility. That's obviously been a big topic today. We're using carefully designed workflows. The one prototype we've got so far, again, like Carol was saying, we're just a year old and a lot to coordinate. So we have some working examples on fish segmentation and trait extraction using SnakeMake. So our goals are end-to-end reproducibility, drop-in replacement of algorithms, and with algorithms uploaded and selected and tuned automatically. And I guess I finished the rest of that. So we do have our first prototype, and the team is working on a paper on that right now. Next slide, please. So computation is always an issue. We have sort of 3 levels of computation. Local GPUs, a local machine for development, it shouldn't initial training, the highest supercomputer cluster, and we're using Amazon Web Services for large scale training. And we're going, as Jeff said, talking about foundation models, one of our research themes is to try to generate a general biological or at least animal-based foundation model that we can use as a basis for transfer learning for a whole variety of problems. And we need as much computational resource and data as we could possibly get. So next slide, please. So models, we're deploying, starting to experiment with Hugging Face. I love the name. I just amazed that somebody had the temerity to call it Hugging Face. That just shows a good sense of humor anyway. So again, our first deployment is in progress, and the advantage is auto configuration and auto generation. Next slide, please. So here's some thoughts on impact. And again, these are very preliminary because of we're 1 year into a large 5-year project. So a big one is workflow and metadata management. These are complex biological systems, and we're dealing with heterogeneous data, multiple data sources, and that's both for the same issue, the same different types of images for the same type of problem, and also just different data sources that we bring to bear. Reproducibility is, of course, we want to demonstrate that as much as possible. Data and model products. Again, the foundation models, and then the other tenet of some of our work is some of what Tanya was talking about in terms of knowledge guided models, and that's both in terms of the structure of the network and in terms of the structure of the loss functions. As part of the work, we have to generate new ontologies, both by hand, and hopefully one of the goals is to do it automatically. And then again, the language we're after is traits, and traits that lead to phylogenies and other predictions and hypotheses. Next slide, please. So current needs, we're compute hungry. We're really pushing the edge on a lot of what we're doing. We'd love to have access to 10 times the compute power. We're jealous of our colleagues at Microsoft and at Google and lots of other places. We're still struggling with, and there may be solutions out there, but we're using Dataverse. So Dataverse is good at the beginning and the end, but we're worried about versioning the intermediate results of data sets, because these are complex workflows with lots of things working, and of course, lots of things can therefore go wrong. And as several people have mentioned, access to large scale data sets. They're out there. Getting our hands on them is a lot of work. I think I see a lot of head shaking. So there's also the continued cultural improvements and the ethos of reproducibility in the computation. Commits, workflow, data storage, data versioning, and maintenance of code. We're talking about mostly code generated by what we call next gens, which are graduate students and postdocs. They're generating code, not necessarily production quality, and it has to live and live on and become useful, because remember, we're not just producing models, we're producing predictions of traits and hypotheses. That's our end goal. And then a big goal of Imageomics is to expand the community, and the hook to bring people in, at least in the computer vision, machine learning side, is well-curated data sets and well-formulated problems to bring people in so that they can get a taste for what we're doing, and then begin to help us with the dirtier work of data management, data cleaning, data gathering, and problem formulation. So I think I'm done. Go ahead. I won't give this back to
Yeah,
Jan.
that's okay.
Go ahead.
I think it's.
Yes. Oh, one coming at you.
Okay. Okay, thanks. The images that you shared and that Tanya also shared, I think in the related work, right? The specimens are all very highly curated
Yes.
samples. And I guess I'm wondering, is there an aspiration that this sort of workflow might at some point be used to identify in situ species, and so that people could do kind of tracking actually in the environment without collected samples? Or is that way down the road?
No, it's actually back up the road behind us. We've been doing that for quite a while. So we've been doing it in Kenya with a number of species, most prominently zebras. We're working with image sets from Indian leopards that are taken in situ. As part of the team, part of the effort for the class was gathering data in Kenya at Impala Research Center. So it really depends on the question. So for example, the questions of the heritability of zebra stripes, Tanya sort of mentioned it, but it's a problem we're actively working on. And that is based on data collected in Kenya, and not funded by this, but by other sources. We're doing the combination of being able to identify and track the individuals over time, so we can have social structures. I lost my train of social structures, but also familiar relationships, all of that. And then we're also gathering dung samples so that we can do the genetic analysis. Another example is we're doing behavioral studies of baboons, and that is based on some data already collected. And as we were talking at a little bit earlier, we're actually providing them guidance now on how to collect data better so that we can handle all the multi-sensor calibration problems. So I think it's really that the examples that we picked weren't in situ, but the fish, there's museum collections of fish and butterflies that are being captured with different types of imaging modalities. I know this is a long answer to a short question, but the other cool thing is people are starting to digitize their data sets because of they know the existence of this project, which is really cool.
Yeah. I was just, I come from an oceanographic environment, and we do working with plankton, where you might have a video plankton recorder, and the animals, because they're in a 3D environment, they're unpredictably oriented. And that makes it really complex to identify them by image at a species level.
Yes, I've looked at some of that data. It's terrifying,
Yeah.
especially since you have such wild distributions of species. There's it right behind you, Alex.
Yeah, we have another question right back there.
Alex, right here.
So you had a slide about the output of the machine learning models being an input to the biological analyses. And I'm just wondering if you could talk about that disconnect at all from the perspective of cyber infrastructure. Do you have to, keep track of some metadata about the kinds of models you're using, with keeping in mind that, the danger being that you if you're ignoring specific details of your machine learning model, for example, misclassification rates and things, that you could have sort of propagation of errors or underestimate uncertainty downstream.
So we are trying very hard and building our infrastructure to keep track of all of that so that they report that. But taking it a step further, we're very, very interested in explainability, because you have to be able to convince someone that they want to spend their time to generate an experiment based on a result that you've shown out with your machine learning model.
That was very, I liked all of the talks in this session, in particular in the context of last year's HDR PI meeting. And for those of you that weren't there, we had an industry panel, and one of the participants on the industry panel was from Google, and somebody asked a question, it might have been Lenore, I'm not exactly sure who, but the response to the question was from Google, from the representative gentleman from Google. He said, we don't really need help with very large data problems because we have data sets that are larger than you've ever seen. But what we aren't good at is mesoscale data problems. So the parallel example is Uber tends to be very good at pricing rides in San Francisco and Paris, and very bad, or not very bad, but not so great at pricing rides in Amherst, Massachusetts, where there isn't so much data and there's a lot of local information. And the opportunity that I see here is the things that you might learn here in building infrastructures. What fraction of those and how do those apply to the mesoscale data that I can apply to the data that I collect in my lab on genetic experiments and things like that, so that my data is interoperable with your very large data sets, but also I can organize my own data in the best way. And then my students leave, go to a company or wherever and bring those best practices with them. How do I translate the large scale to the mesoscale and then propagate it across the community?
I think we've gotten into the panel discussion.
I was going to say, can we say that we have moved? Is that question for?
No, that's fine. It's a good question.
Good segue. So are you trying to deflect? Or
I'm trying to deflect and buy a minute.
Okay.
So I'm not 100% sure I understand the question. And so let me just give a quick response and see what you think. By mesoscale, you're just talking about small numbers of samples. I'm sorry, just.
No, I mean, not 150 terabytes, but like 1 terabyte or 10 terabytes or that, a genomic experiment maybe is like a gigabyte or 5 gigabytes, and I'll do 100 samples and those types of things.
Well, that's the kind of scale that we generally you're getting toward the scale that we can handle in academic labs. So I apologize. I'm not really grabbing the question at this point, and I'm sorry.
I can give it a try. So in sort of our research under the iGuide Institute, and also in my other projects, we run into this a lot, right? So I think, to me, one of the big problems is really the working cross scales, because at least the ones I've seen, that a problem may require several models working together and linked in some fashion, and it's not really a software issue. We can write software, any software, but the big issue is really to sort of people getting together to understand the models, what they're doing, and the data input output and how they match up, sort of, for lack of a more scientific description. That and usually that process takes a lot longer than when our us computer scientists start getting into it and helping them transform the data. and doing all the data processing necessary for data sets to be used across different models. So at least that's my perspective. Geoffrey, you want to comment on this?
Well, yeah, well, I'm not totally certain I know what the issue is, but I do think science and research has more data sets than Google does. And having a lot of modest sized data sets is certainly a challenge, which probably, and in fact, I do not find Google very interested in FAIR and things like that. And well, by Google, I meant industry. We have been pushing industry to adopt FAIR principles for their data, and they don't disagree with it, but I don't think it's number one in their list of problems to be solved.
So yeah, you have a question?
I have a question. I wanted to everyone panelists. I think we right now, many of these projects, we need at least 3 roles. People like domain scientists who knows since science question they want to answer. A data scientist who knows how to build a model to maybe best deep learning model they can try, and a cyber infrastructure scientist expert who knows how to run in a large scale environment and with much bigger data sets. So my question is, what do you think is the best practice to this kind of working together? One way would be like the scientist provided a problem, and then the data science design model, then the cyber infrastructure expert will make it scalable. Another one would be like the 3 people, 3 roles working together every week just to make things go over step by step. I think both projects would have pros and cons, but in your experiences, what are the good ways for people in diverse backgrounds and eventually want to solve the same goal? Any comments from everyone?
So, but I mean, if you look at ML Commons, you identify broad common principles like storage or logging, and then you have the collaboration on those broad problems, and then they're applied to specific examples by different or particular subgroups.
From my experience, it's almost like a co-production process. So I find that more and more, used to be that, we get data thrown at us saying, I have a problem, you go work on it. Now I feel the agile sort of software development approach is being used on these interdisciplinary research teams, that we have really highly iterative process because for let's just take software engineers, for example, they have to be involved even when the researchers discussing how their models can work together, how they want to pass data sets from one to next. So I see that as a very much a human issue as well as technology.
I agree with the closely working together, and people have to learn how to speak enough of the same language. So I'll admit I had no idea what a taxonomic key was until about 6 months ago. But it's got to be a tight integration, and that's part of what we're trying to do with the courses, is to really get the next generation of students graduating who know how to really work with each other. They don't have to be expertise, they don't have to design new models if you're the biologist, but on the other hand, you may not be doing the phylogenetic analysis of a biologist if you're a computer scientist, but you do have to work together. And this is why we're pushing them to formulate problems together.
Excellent, great. Yeah. We have another.
Anand Padmanabhan from iGuide, I guess. I work with Carol. The question is like larger for this institutes, HDR institutes together. So we are here so that we could collaborate better, share better, I guess. And I'm sure many of us here
have cyber infrastructure needs, as well as develop cyber infrastructure tools. So what do you think would be the best way for us to share this knowledge and kind of bring this community up together? So we are not reinventing wheels. Like this is kind of goes back to Tanya's point. How could we use the things that were being developed in iGuide or other kind of things? So what would be your perspectives?
Do you folks want to take it?
Sure, I'll start. Okay. In terms, to me, a big, it's not a direct answer to your question, but again, I'll go back to the curation of problems and data sets. I think one of the biggest things we all face is explainability. And so, but there's a lot of people, I mean, it's like the hottest problem or one of the hottest problems in the ML field. And if we can generate really well curated data sets on some, and when you do that, of course, you have to realize the expense of that. And I know the ML Commons team has just done a lot of effort on this area. But it is curating, I would call it curating problems and data sets. In terms of the actual, to me, that's the biggest thing. But with the cyber infrastructure, you really have to look carefully at what's being done, what the principles are. And I would not mind participating in an extended discussion of that. And I would, of course, like to bring in some members of our team. And I'm sure you guys would as well.
I think that's a very hard question to answer, very hard thing to do. There are a variety of ways of sharing. I mean, I remember being at a different PI meeting and I wrote this question on there that basically, for every team developing cyber infrastructure, the reuse is probably the last thing they think about because you have your goals, you have to get things done really quickly and you want to support things directly that you're charged to do. So it's always afterthought of adapting something for some other uses. And I think some of the things we've learned that you have to do it multiple times. I don't know how some of our products we rewrote 3 times to get to the point where it's easier to integrate with other platforms. And I doubt that you can get around of, we have a better terminology, refactoring rather than rewriting. Rewriting sounds very kind of like you didn't do it well in the first time. So I think it's very hard. I do like the suggestion that we should really discuss this and put some concrete ideas forward and then have a ongoing effort to continue to pursue this.
Any other comments? So I'm getting a little peer pressure up here from the previous question, from Zhenwu's question about the collaboration. And so this embedded, what I wanted to just say, it was the idea of collaboration was the embedded information scientists or the data scientists or the computer scientists in the scientific lab and vice versa. These kinds of partnerships happen in your project. So that was my answer. I was getting peer pressure up here. So yeah. Anyhow, toss it back to the audience. This has been an excellent discussion going across the 3 projects and the larger cyber infrastructure. Are there any other questions at the moment? So we have one more. Okay. Good.
It's a great panel. How do you deal with data and workflows that age? So things that break when there's a new version of software and interoperability and documenting that. Is that something some of you are interested or have been addressing?
You mean terrified of? So this guy, I think, I don't have a good answer other than that we're very much aware of it in the sense of it's part of just the general problem of long-term maintenance of the infrastructure and aging and adapting to new versions of software that you depend on is part of that. I don't have any specific answers to that.
Jane, are you aware of any metadata annotation schemes for this problem?
For aging software, aging.
So for example, if you were going to annotate workflows with metadata to say something about, oh, breaks with Python 3 point this, needs Python, this kind of thing. Have people investigated schemas for that kind of metadata to help people reuse data?
So there are hundreds of metadata schemes. Sometimes I know about them, sometimes I don't. I have seen that kind of information recorded in metadata. Not necessarily a formalized scheme, but like under description and other things. So I like your question. It's a probing question. I would like to look into it a little bit more and get back to you. But it's a good question. So I can't say yes, but I can't say it doesn't exist, or some aspects of it may exist in multiple standards and it hasn't been put together. So good question.
If I may add?
Yes.
Best practices in software. When we write code and we publish packages, we declare the set of dependencies. So that should be, if it's properly, designed, it should be there. What about containerization? So that's one of the requirements to containerize, is that you have all the dependencies, right? And if you containerize your tool, it will rerun. It will keep running forever, right? It may not be extensible, but it will run, right?
Yeah, and NSF has supported a lot of efforts in software sustainability. And so looking at those, the outcomes of those would also probably yield some kinds of standards. But I think there was somebody else that had their hand up with a question. Oh, yep. Comment. Oh, withdrawn. All right, we're good. We're getting the time is up. Let's give our presenters a big round of applause. We have come up with 3 different groups based on our discussions that helped form this panel. And so these are the discussion groups that will happen around topics. And so Eric, maybe raise your hand. You'll be leading one of them, and Anand and Jen Wu. And so bring your topics to these and see what emerges. So thank you, everyone. Great.